Mitch Klebanoff on the Fishbowl. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you swimming in the bowl.
You've got your theme going.
I do. I do.
Good. Glad to hear.
Well, I'm a huge fan of your work. I just actually graduated from Point Park University, majoring in screenwriting, and
Great.
I
Wow.
just came. Thank you. Just came from an interview with my former screenwriting teacher, Steve Cuden, is his name. Great teacher. Point Park has a great program, and it's taught me a lot. But also, um, watching movies is what really has taught me everything I need to know in terms of storytelling. And the first film that I like to talk about that you wrote was Disorderlies.
I wrote Disorderlies, yes. 1980s. Yeah, we go back.
Yep, yep. The year before I was born, actually.
I'm hearing a lot of that lately. It's amazing how when I interact with the industry, I hear much more of that than my contemporaries of that time. There's an attrition process that takes place for certain.
Right, right. Well, I guess I'd like to talk about what kind of went into the idea of Disorderlies and I guess your writing process, all that.
Well, from like practical perspective, the project came to me through the director who had read a script of mine that I had developed while I was living in New York. That was a spec script. Never sold that script to anyone, but the director had read it, had just directed Crush Groove, the Run DMC Curtis Blow movie. I guess like the first hip hop movie made, and there was a small part of that movie that had the Fat Boys in it, doing a song called "All You Can Eat," where they pig out at some you know um, some restaurant. And so they decided that Warner Brothers had a division at that time to make urban films and small films, and he had the ability to get that done. And so he came to us and then told us what they wanted to do a Three Stooges movie, sort of with the Fat Boys, and we came up with a pitch. We went into Warner Brothers, we pitched it, we sold it, and started working on it. And do you want me to take you through? Do you want to intercede with questions about that, or do you want me to just go and tell more about that story?
We can do a bit of both. Why don't you tell more about the story first, and then we can go into, like, I guess the logistics of the writing process.
Well, yeah, because I tend to focus a lot on the business part of it, because a lot of people seem to be interested in that. And the writing process, well, the writing process of this particular movie was very, very interesting too, because there are some challenges that we had to overcome throughout the process. And we did overcome them, but I'm not sure the movie overcame them exactly, even though I'm happy with everything that happened. Well, first of all, we went on tour with the Fat Boys. The I guess that starts from a writing perspective with an essential, which is how well you know your subject. Even though we wrote the treatment and the pitch for it without knowing the Fat Boys very well, other than seeing what they had done in the past, listening to their music, just getting a feel for them. That was enough from the studio perspective. But for our perspective, since they were going to play the roles, they weren't really actors, we had to know more. And we also had this idea, well, after we went on tour with them, we're like an odd choice for that movie. Two white guys doing the Disorderlies, the Fat Boys movie. I mean, my partner was from New England. Um, definitely did not fit in well with the Fat Boys in general. I was from Queens, which happened to be, and basically from the same neighborhood as the Fat Boys. And like we're really within like a mile of each other, though years apart, because the neighborhood was a very different neighborhood at the time I was writing that movie from when I was 13 and moved out of that neighborhood. But my experiences growing up were quite, different than my partner's. And I had always gone to mixed race schools. I was very comfortable in that world, and that helped a little bit. And so we went on tour. That was a trip, and got to know the Fat Boys, and came away with a concern, given the fact that the studio, everybody talked about the film as a crossover movie. I don't know if your audience would know exactly what that means, but it wasn't originally targeted to play to a solely urban audience. The goal was to have as many black fans and white fans. It was, that kind of thing. However, to be perfectly frank, in hanging with the Fat Boys, they spoke hip hop and they mumbled somewhat. And so it was not that easy to understand them very well from our perspective. Of course, they understood each other. This is a culture clash issue, I guess. But it was a culture clash issue that represented a problem that would exist if the studio and the producers all wanted that crossover movie. So we took a leap in the writing. This is how it affected the craft. And we made the movie somewhat villain-driven, so that it relied less on the Fat Boys' language. And all the producers were black, and the director was black, and so we hand the script in. Everybody goes, "It's a pretty good script, but it doesn't have that much dialogue for the lead characters." And we said, "Yeah, we know, but we were concerned about this issue with people being able to understand them." And they said, "That's totally not cool." And we took it to heart, and we said, we were just trying to execute it in a way that would work from the perspective. So we go back, we write all these jokes for the Fat Boys, and they say that they're going to have like a teacher who is going to help them enunciate clearer for the wider audience to understand. And I don't know if it's really about the wider audience or it's just the audience. But I don't know that because there's no data to back that up. But so we write those jokes. Everyone loves it. Everyone's happy. This is like a dream because it's like really fast, and they're ready to go make this movie. And I'm going to cut out of some of that other writing elements to the end of this particular little story, which is that we're on the set. They have this person helping them, and we finish the movie. Everybody's happy. They test the movie in front of the mixed audience, and the numbers come back and nobody understands them. And so they have this moment of truth where they're thinking, what's his name? There was a guy who was really good at impersonating voices at the time. And the studio was thinking, should we dub this over? And oh God, why can't I remember his name? He was really famous at the time. He was a well-known comedian. He really could do almost anything. He was brilliant. And but of course they threw that idea out to the producers and everyone. They said, "No, no way. There's no way you can do that. That would be completely horrible, and the audience would find the movie uh, totally inauthentic in any way, shape, or form." And so the studio dropped the screen release from 1,500 at the time. Now you got to go back to the 80s to understand how many screens matter. You know, at the time, 1,500 screens was a pretty, very, very wide release. And it was from 1,500 to 500, which was to basically cherry pick and target the urban areas that they felt the movie would work in. And so that's what they did. And that's how it ended up. That's that part of the story. I faced this issue with understandability of speaking in other movies down the road as well. But and it's you know, like for like a lot of these people say that British movies in the U.S. don't work well because when it's, I mean, when it's mixed in, you know, in some movies, people pick up on the speed or the intonation, and they can follow it easier. But there are some movies that they just a wide American audience will not relate to because they can't pick up the language fast enough, even though it's a Brit. So I know it's hard to believe, but true.
Oh, it definitely is. I mean, like Guy Ritchie is like one of those writer directors that's able to kind of cross stream like British dialogue and films in general to the American audience with like Snatch and Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, Rock and Rolla. Like those are all based in London, but it's definitely distributed to an American audience, and he's gained a huge American audience following because of the genre of his films. And I think it definitely depends on what kind of story you're telling and the genre it pertains to in terms of how it's going to relate to American audiences. Because a film like La Femme Nikita, who was one of what was that Luc Besson's first major film. Uh, the American version, Point of No Return, wasn't as good as the French version, but it allowed him to bring um, his film writing and directing to U.S. Soil with films like The Professional and The Fifth Element and everything that
Well, I
followed.
probably could make an argument that even with Snatch and Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, that box office was suppressed by the issue of how well. I mean, I love the uniqueness of those movies, both visually and also language wise. But the why, you know, when in the business that I was in, which is the mainstream studio business for most of my career, um, what that was, you know, those numbers, I guess, that they would see that as being, oh, that's a novelty, or that's not as good as we would have hoped it would be because the numbers didn't become gigantic. And but of
Right,
course, you
right.
know, you know, for me, even, you know, Snatch especially. My dog is going crazy. Hold on a second. Um, she might do this about 4 times through this conversation because she goes out the doggy door, but then refuses to come
Quite all
back
right.
in the doggy door. So anyway, like Snatch was harder to understand than, as I recall, and in Bruges, by the way, really hard to understand. And so, you know,
Right,
you're just
right.
a little bit behind. Your cognition is a little bit behind where you'd exactly like it to be. And for really just being able to not get lost for a moment or miss something. And so, of course, everyone recognized that Guy Ritchie was brilliant. And at the same time, I'm sure that there was somebody who was disappointed thinking that Americans didn't understand what the hell they were saying. Now, maybe we've gotten better, but I don't know because I still hear it. I still hear that complaint all the time.
I can definitely agree with you there because um, one of Tom Hardy's most recent films, Legend, which I love. I thought that was like the perfect reinterpretation of Goodfellas, um, just an English version. But it's really hard to understand what both Tom Hardys are saying because of the
Yeah.
region that they're supposed to be from. But I mean, someone who's really into movies and doesn't mind kind of like catching up in a sense or uh, just kind of following along on certain parts because I got the basic gist of what they were saying, even though I didn't understand all the slang and everything. But it could have definitely probably done better if it was full on American
And I'm not
dialogue
saying
and
that people should do
all
it
that.
that way. They people they make the
Right.
movies they want to make, and that's fine. It's just more from a business perspective, and what I faced in Disorderlies was an issue just having to do with, all right, how wide are we going to release this movie? How oh well, it wasn't like it was my decision. I still would have tried it because over the years, I've come to learn that movie has its own. It's like a silly little movie, and it has its own unique place because of being like really the second hip hop movie, but really the first comedy. And so,
Right. Right.
people who were 6 or 7 or 8 years old at the time the movie came out, who are now like VPs in the studios. They just or I meet them at a film festival or something like that, and they sometimes want to introduce me to their moms. It's like it's just a really kind of funny, and that tends to be African American, but it can also be eventually, of course. Um, Most of the white kids also saw the movie, at some point or another. Maybe not when it first came out. I mean, when it came out, even at 500 screens, I think it was number 3 at the box office that weekend. Um, but the majority of people who I interact with didn't see it that weekend. They saw it over time, because it had like a little bit of a small, tiny cult status within the African American movie community.
Well, like for me, it was growing up watching Encore in the '90s, and Encore would play Disorderlies, Class Act with Kid and Play, the House Party movies. So I grew up like kind of watching,
Yeah.
I guess, the reruns in a sense on the movie channels and just falling in love with it because my dad, who was actually from Long Island, uh, got me into like all different genres of music at a very young age. And I always tell this story also because it really is what got me in the film is him showing me Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger at the ripe
I
young
can't
age of
say that.
5 years old. Um, set the tone on everything I like today. I am a huge Schwarzenegger fan. To this day, probably one of the most diehard ones at that too. But it's like it's what got me interested in film, and I've never looked back
Well, that movie
after
was
seeing
that was a
Total
great movie.
Recall at
That
age 5.
Yeah.
It
I
really
didn't put it.
was.
We did
It still
for my
is.
kids. We did like a list of 100 movies that they should watch. But I don't think Total Recall was on the list because I think we were being snobby. I mean, because my taste, personal taste, sure, Total Recall is really high up, and but there's something about like when you break down like I don't know, best of lists or the kind of things that you think are going to teach them or something. I don't know. For you, it taught you a lot. I don't, we didn't have that on the list, but thoroughly enjoyable and trippy too. So really, it expands your mind.
Right, right. I mean, my dad kind of gave me a whole list to start out watching, starting with like I guess the essential action movies, which was like anything 80s Schwarzenegger. I mean, there was a period of time that for 2 months straight, every weekend we went to Blockbuster. I rented Predator, um, but he also started me out on the essential comedies, which was like Peter Sellers stuff, Doctor Strangelove, being there. A number of other films along the way. But I mean, growing up, my sister actually got her name Jessica because I was so in love with Who Framed Roger Rabbit that, like I said to my mom and dad, why don't we name my two yet to be born little sister Jessica because of Jessica Rabbit,
It's pretty
and that's kind
interesting.
of how that came to
That's quite
be.
a legacy to live up
Um,
to.
yeah, and yeah, yeah, but movies have been like a huge passion since I well, even really even before Total Recall, because my first actual memory that I can think, as far back to is being in a movie theater at the age of 3, watching Back to the Future Part 3 in theaters, which was again also one of
Well,
my
it sounds
top
like
favorite
your
trilogies
parents and
of all
us were
time.
like we had that similarity. Maybe it's, I mean, of course, it's true across the country, but I guess your dad being from Long Island will sort of like take it as a New York thing, but it's not. It's definitely not.
Right, right.
Where was he from in Long Island? I know this is a digression from the interview, probably. Me
Well,
too.
actually,
So we,
he's from Queens originally, um, and moved to Long Island. I think when he was like about 8 or 9 years old, and
hmm
he's from what is it, Manhasset? That's where he's originally from, and now he's lived in Pittsburgh pretty much the entire time that I've been here. Which I'm 28. I've been here
yeah.
27 years
What
now.
brought him to Pittsburgh? What brought you? Well, you to Pittsburgh, I should say.
Well, I was born in Silver Springs, Maryland, and my mom got a job at a Reed Smith law firm, and that's what she's from Pittsburgh originally, and we moved here when I was, I guess, about 1 year old, and she's been working there up until recently, where she now works at Jones Day law firm, and my dad has been a continuing supporter of everything that I've been doing with my interest in film. And first, it was like special makeup effects, because seeing Total Recall at age 5, that's like, whoa, like what the hell is this shit? Um, then it kind of transitioned into I wanted to direct, and then it kind of transitioned into me
Well, to want to
wanting to
direct,
write, and
unless
that's
you have
kind
a
of where
best
I'm at
friend
now.
or somebody who is a screenwriter, you've got to then turn inwards to find that script that you're going to direct. I mean, unless if you tap into from the
Right.
school you're in and find a screenwriter who trusts you, and it's not easy to find a good script. And even though, I mean, it's probably easy to find a good script. It's probably, but it's really hard to find a really excellent script. So that's at one time a studio
Right.
exec head actually said to me, the problem isn't that we're choosing between terrible scripts and good scripts. We're choosing between good scripts and great scripts. And I know people will say, "Oh, boy, then how did you make that?" Well, the thing is, sometimes movie coming out well is a little bit of a miracle because there's a lot of reasons why they don't come out well. That some may have to do with the script and when they start the movie, they started too early, it wasn't rewritten, or some small part went awry and nobody realized that how crucial that small bit would be to the whole, and the whole movie just sort of falls apart. And because, and this gets into my, I guess, screenwriting process. You're in making a movie the way I've always looked at it, or I should say, designing a movie or a story, which is what I think of screenwriting to be. You have to layer the audience's perceptions one at a time to create the world that you're in. And even if it's a regular world, there's a lot of even in the regular world, you know, um, you can take a lot for granted about what people's shared experiences are and what they know, but not always. And a lot of times, what I find when I read scripts um, from people who haven't thought about that issue yet is that they assume too much about what a person may know. And especially as movies go more global, that's even more the case. I mean, you can't pander to everybody or you can't fix that problem for everybody. And there is classic ways of writing things that, will overwhelm these issues. But I do read a lot of times where somebody just is assuming there's a given in a scene that I missed it. So the scene didn't work. And then there are times when you're in the middle of rewriting stages going towards production where you remember that something is in the script and you forget that if you cut that scene, put it this way, I shouldn't say this, I don't forget that, that's my job, but I'm not always there. My job is to make sure that that scene is still there and to argue vehemently for the fact that if it's not there, people are going to have a hard time understanding something. And then everybody can make a choice at that point. But things get lost in the shuffle. And a lot of it's the expedience of the schedule and the money.
It's definitely the truth. I mean, with my own writing, I mean, I'm going through. I mean, writing to begin with is really rewriting. You don't write something and say, this is it. I mean, you write it and then you get it out, and then it's constantly going back and rewriting what you originally wrote to get it to where it is to a point ready to say this is ready to go. I'm ready to send this out, or it's being looked at by someone saying this is ready to go into production. But it's I mean my with my own writing, I'm definitely like I'm working on a zombie comedy cartoon series right now, and I wrote it as a short in um, one of my film classes at Point Park, and it started out as a short, and I went back and did a rewrite close to the end of my final semester at Point Park, and it extended it to 16 pages, and then I did another rewrite with it recently, where it's now at about 40 pages. And through doing that rewrite, I came up with an idea to kind of make it, something different and make it into an actual series. And it's really interesting how um, through doing rewrites, you can get new ideas, you can get new concepts, something can go in an entirely different direction from where you originally wanted it, to being something entirely different or in the same realm of what you were going for, but in a sense, greater than what it originally was. And it definitely depends on um, your writing style and what you're trying to say in terms of what you're writing. But
Well,
um,
I think it's a lot of
I mean,
screenwriting
I
is about
definitely agree with you on
temperament
that.
and how you approach rewrites and your open mindedness um, to so many people like I don't want to constantly just talk about people that I think handle screenwriting wrong because there are many people that of course handle it right, but one of the I do notice some things that are consistent with some scripts that I read. And one of those is a reluctance to rewrite things. I mean, people know that they're supposed to rewrite things. They've heard this before. It's been repeated, over and over and over again. But there's a difference between really embracing an open attitude about a rewrite and not. And also, it depends on who and why, who's demanding the rewrite, who's suggesting it, who is it you, is it them? All those kind of, writers tend to be kind of rebellious by nature. Um, and they don't necessarily want to feel that an authority is sometimes, I'm not, this is like a gross generalization. Um, and it may be telling you more about me than about anybody else. Um, but it's they do resist or they think something is rewritten when they really didn't embrace the whole. They patched it as opposed to sitting, really, really, giving the new ideas the air that they need, and that may require letting things start to change from page one. And even if it's a small change throughout, because most things in a script ripple through the whole movie if they're in the first act. And there's it's just there's a reluctance or there's a I started to all right. This is going to get really deep into the weeds now. Um, so a bunch of years ago, I worked on a video game for the NSA that was the purpose was to train intelligence analysts to avoid cognitive bias. And cognitive bias may not be what some people think it means. This is 42 or something like that defined cognitive biases, which is the way your brain works. That is kind of an automatic response. Stuff that you're not aware is even affecting you. And of course, in the context of intelligence analysts, this is they thought very crucial because they're taking in data, they're then going in certain directions as a result of the information they're getting, and they don't want their automatic responses to necessarily steer them in the wrong direction. Okay. And that's because there are some things that are a cognitive bias could be like an authority bias. If it's your boss, if it's anybody you perceive in any way to be an authority, you will have an auto response in favor of what that person's doing, as long as that's the way you perceive them. So, of course, in the military or intelligence world, that's based on a hierarchy of chain of command. That undoing that response is one of the hardest things in the world. In a corporation, it's kind of similar. It's really hard. I mean, the ultimate job is being able to, have a boss that is so open-minded that you can tell them anything, right? But most people are afraid that that's not really the case, and they may be right about that. Well, anyway, I found in my research on this game that cognitive bias plays a big part in screenwriting. So, one part of the way to describe this is what do you do? What does a young writer do with their script when they're done, or their film, or whatever? Who do they show it to first? so often, typical thing is, oh, they show it to their dad, their mother, their cousin, their best friend, that's natural, right? And I would argue, don't do it. Don't do it. And the
Right.
reason is because that situation parallels the biggest problem of like cognitive bias, which is you're in a highly emotional state. Writer, I don't, most writers, they finish a script, they give it to someone. That is a definition of a highly emotional state. And in a highly emotional state, you imprint on the first things that you hear. And sometimes if those things are critical, that might be good because then you're going to imprint, and they could be wrong, which could be a disaster. But if they're right, that's helpful because you're going to imprint in a critical way towards your own work, and you're going to then look to see what that really means and investigate that area. If you hear from somebody who is not very strong in analysis. They really want to make you feel good. Your mom, your girlfriend, boyfriend, depending on who it is, and they say, "Oh, it was great. I really liked it," and then they give you examples, and that will imprint too, right? Now the question is, every time you then get a criticism from somebody later on, you will weigh that new criticism against that. And if say they love this particular scene, but that scene doesn't belong in this movie, you will have a very hard time cutting it. And it might be the very thing that's getting in your way. The discipline of rewriting is very, very difficult because of all the things you're weighing. It's very hard to clear your brain and really see it from a objective perspective. All right, that's enough weed talk about that because I hope that was understandable. And did you get what I was getting at?
I Oh, I definitely got it. More so than you know. I mean, I agree with it 110%. I mean, it's often what our screenwriting teachers teach us at Point Park is to never kind of get your heart set on, does this scene absolutely need to be there, and more so, um, working on ways to work around if it doesn't need to be there. If it does, then how to make it better, or if it doesn't need to be there, how to work around either deleting it altogether or rewriting it so that it does fit. um, it's I guess it's all part of again the rewriting process. But definitely I agree with you 110% because when I just finished the script and I'm getting ready to send it off, and before I do, I gave it I didn't show it to any of my friends. I sent a PDF to my some of my fellow senior thesis class, and I just gave a copy to my screenwriting teacher to look at because I trust them to look at it from an analysis point of view and not, you know, someone that is gonna say it's awesome regardless of whether it is or not. I mean, I personally think my writing has something to say, but there could be, tens of thousands, if not millions, of people out there that are like, this is shit, and I'd rather have someone who is trained in analysis and in the screenwriting field, to review it versus showing it to my best friend who I do show my work to just to
Just not
have him read
first.
it and to get that joy of
No,
like,
because
hey, this
really
is
the
awesome.
order that you do
But
these things is
in terms
crucial.
of
Because
just not first,
the way the
exactly,
brain does it
exactly.
is that they will weigh the first
Right, right,
fact more than subsequent facts.
right, right. And I think it's at a point where it's gone through enough rewrites that it's done, but it might need a few more tweaks before it's at that point to be ready to be sent off. And I feel that definitely my screenwriting teacher will be able to give me the last few notes on it, if any, that need to be given. But um you know it's a great feeling when you finally get to that point where it's like, I think this is done. Let me show it to some professionals who are in this field of analysis, with screenplays and screenwriting,
It's
before
nerve
I
wracking
truly
because
say to myself,
and it's not for
okay,
the faint of heart
now it's
because or
time.
for the
um,
somebody who is short on funds even, because there would be this tendency, oh, I got to move this, I got to get this to the next level, I got to get it out there. All that
right,
stuff is weighing on you when somebody says to you, well, I didn't like this, or this didn't work for me, or that. And because it's so, rewriting can also be so scattered. The the responses could take you in an infinite amount of directions. And as a result of that, if you have a hard time containing the infinite, um, you will shut down and sort of say it works, because the task feels at times overwhelming, and not because it's like, oh, so important, but because there are truly an infinite amount of choices, and they all, I look at, I my writing partner that I began my
true,
career with, pretty much not began, but locked in pretty early. We certainly did the Sword Leaves and Beverly Hills Ninja together. The He was a math guy. Went to Dartmouth. I think he was valedictorian. He was like not the guy you would expect would be writing comedy. And in some ways, he just had this kind of straight laced part of him that was most of him, and then he had this twisted part that was kind of hidden and came out, when he wrote. But he definitely worked screenplays from a mathematical kind of perspective. I mean, we do understand. Screenplay is, if this happens, then this happens. If this happens, then this happens. If this happens, then this, and this can happen. Which direction do I go in? And that's when the infinite gets into play. And that's why it's overwhelming at times. Very few people can just gut it out and say, I see the whole movie in my head. I don't have to analyze this. And if you are like that, then you are blessed.
well, I guess that's a good segue into the next film I wanted to talk to you about, which was Beverly Hills Ninja. um, I Chris Farley was one of those comedians that, again, like Belushi, like Candy, went out way before they should have. And I view Chris Farley as one of truly the most gifted,
Absolutely.
funniest comedians um, of the 20th century, and could have just been something amazing more amazing than what he already was. And when I heard, the when they released the rare audio recording of him voicing Shrek, I was like, that
Yeah.
movie would not have been a kids movie. I mean, it was borderline like adult kids movie, but if he was voicing that, and had gone on to voice it like he originally was supposed to, that movie would not have been a more aimed to a kids audience film. And it's really interesting the progression of his career, because he was always the funniest when he was like the side characters, in the bus driver in like Billy Madison, or like his cameo in Wayne's World, like he's always was like or even Dirty Work, he's like the funniest characters of those films. And the David Spade team was funny, but it wasn't like as funny as he really was. And also, I kind of viewed those movies as kind of like laugh at the fat man versus really he's a truly gifted comedian. And the later kind of progression of his career towards the end was him kind of transitioning out of the David Spade team to him solely being the lead protagonist of the comedic films that he was starring in. And Beverly Hills Ninja was really one of the major films where
We
he
still
was
got
was like the
criticized
sole
plenty on the
protagonist
subject
of
of
the
that you
film,
brought up
with
about
everybody supporting
laughing at the
him.
fat man
You know
kind
what
of
I mean?
stuff. I mean, I mean, all I can say about I don't know if you're finished with your thought. Did you have more to go?
Right.
I mean, all I can say about I don't know if you're finished with your thought. Did you have more to
No,
go?
that was basically it. I mean, seeing him like really shine in a sense as the characters that he was gifted to really play, showing his
It
comedic
didn't last
talent
very
was
long after that.
definitely, I think,
Yeah, that
the
was
beginning of
really
kind of
amazing.
like
Like
Beverly Hills
he's
Ninja.
amazing, and it was
Unfortunately,
truly
didn't
sad,
get to
sad
go.
moment. And to
Yeah,
hear when
yeah,
I just will always remember hearing that for certain. And he was a great person to work with. I enjoyed it enormously. And I don't know if you know this part of the Beverly Hills Ninja story, but the movie wasn't. The movie was developed 5 years before it was made, and so he didn't really even exist. He had a very short window in in movies, so he was not on our. It wasn't written that way, and actually, the first comedian attached to that movie was Dana Carvey. Does that surprise you? So when we wrote it, it was not, whether he was fat or not fat, that
that
wasn't part
definitely
of it. And
does.
maybe that's one of the reasons why it worked in that way. It worked better because it wasn't written. Now, certainly it was rewritten and took advantage of those things. But it wasn't originally written from that perspective. And, but we we did a reading with Dana and the actress who played was the girl from Friends. No, not Jennifer, and not yes, Courtney Cox. So we did a reading, and Dana. I don't know if you knew this. I can't say remember. You'd have to see this in reruns. I think. He used to do this voice of this guy who sold chickens, and but he was in love with them in some ways. So he wouldn't sell them to anybody. That was the joke on Saturday Night Live, and it was kind of funny. And he did this Asian voice, And I guess that's kind of what people were thinking with him being cast. And we were, hey, we're happy to get somebody of that stature, at the time, on our film. That sounds great. But when we did the reading, that voice became very tired very quickly. It just could not last a whole movie. And so the movie kind of like didn't move forward at that point, and it kind of went into like just nowhere. And it was then subsequently bought by, I think it was owned by 4 or 5 different studios. They each would buy it from each other, and it kept on being developed. And in fact, it's an interesting writing story because we never did those rewrites. They always went to someone else, and they never got made. And eventually, we bought the script back. And in a kind of arcane way that is the Writers Guild allows when a movie is developed and not active. And then while I was in the process of doing that, a producer contacted me and said, "Do you have those rights? And we've got somebody to do the film, and we're not going to tell you who it is, but we're going to make this deal with you." And so there was all this like, "Oh, are we going to get the rights? Are they going to clear from the original studio? Are they going to okay it? Are they going to argue against it?" Or because it was really the Writers Guild doing this for me, and we got them, and we made this kind of deal blindly with this producer, not knowing who it was, and then found out who it was, and so that there was a kind of empowering writer story because and that's why I'm a producer of that, because otherwise we had written it, people liked it, it didn't get made, it went around town, nothing happened. I mean, it was like big people owned it too. I mean, Brian Grazer and Ron Howard owned it at one point, and the producer from Saturday Night Live owned it at one point when Brandon Tartikoff went from NBC to running Paramount, and there was these crazy casts also, like Macaulay Culkin and Steve Seagal. I mean, really insane things that you would do here. And then when it was Farley, it was like, oh, great, that was fantastic to hear that. But the irony, this is a crazy story, though. The irony is that there was like a weird deal part of, I'm not going to go into that now. Until you want to talk about deals, then we'll talk about that. But the ultimately, it was that producer was the final producer, and it went to Sony, TriStar. Sony owned them at the time, and it got made with him, but it wasn't him originally. Sony owned them at the time, and it got made with him, but it wasn't him originally.
Really interesting.
Steve Seagal wasn't going to be that guy.
I mean,
Steve Seagal would have been the brother.
Dana Carvey or Steve Seagal,
and Macaulay Culkin would have been the ninja.
Okay, right.
Oh, then there was a Michael J. Fox version. The beauty about getting the rights back through this way is that all the money that was spent in those 5 studio incarnations, which I think came to about $2 million, did not have to get paid back. In fact, we could get the rights for basically what we were paid in its original form. So in the original deal. That's one of the problems with trying to get the rights back in a different way, is that the studios add all the development costs to the price to get it back. And so easily you could have a movie that you got paid, was X dollars, $200,000, let's say, all of a sudden has a price tag of $1.2 million. And that's for the script alone. So in this case, there was $2 million in rewrites and other costs on top of that movie. And then when we got it, we could buy it, and then we could also resell it, which was a fantastic thing. We sold that movie twice. It really was great, 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 great thing.
We sold that movie twice. It really was great, 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 great. Well, it definitely turned out beautifully. Again, one of Farley's, last and most awesome performances. I was wondering if
No,
you
I
really
mean,
had any.
I was on set
Were you
a
on
lot.
set at any point
I mean, you're still a
when it was
little bit
shooting,
in the
or
background
you just kind of stay in like
sometimes,
the
and
background?
sometimes when you're really needed. I mean, no director wants
And
you
it,
jumping in and saying, "Wait a second, that's stupid," you know, or something like that. But you're if you have a good relationship with the director, then you're a consultant to that person at the time that
right,
you're
right.
there. And there's and even and to Farley too. Farley had his. There was one. Actually, this is really kind of a funny story. Um, Farley, I think, really wanted to do this movie because it was about family. I know, it was like him and his brother. He washed ashore on this island, and he had this like ninja brother who never really accepted him, and the father was kind of like, maybe you should go into a different business. This is not really for you. And he goes, no, no, no. This is the family business. I really want to be in the family business, and that was kind of the essential thought. And then there was this stuff at the end of the movie that was really about him finding out finally that his brother had been following after him the whole time, and his brother's in trouble, and then that's what like sort of brings his abilities out. He's, so Farley, wanted to, push that even heavier, and but the director really wasn't
Right.
listening to him, and so he would ask me to be sort of a go-between and express his idea. And there are times I really liked his ideas, and I would go to the director and say, so what about if we do blah 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 blah, whatever that was. And I remember this really funny thing when the director sort of looked at me and he said, Mitch, it's about a fat guy in a ninja suit. That's it. And like, so he was just basically doing this sort of like, there's a couple of moments in my career as a writer where a producer or a director would take me aside and go, you're not getting the general sense of this. You're going off into this like thing about family, a thing about, something intellectual, whatever I was off into at the time. And they would like straighten me out. I remember the very first time it happened, I wasn't a writer at the time. One of my first jobs was as a location manager on the pilot to Fame. And I was watching Debbie Allen choreograph a scene just in the back. And the producer, Jerry Eisenberg, who was a great guy, came up to me, put his arm around me. He looks at the scene. He goes, Mitch, it's just this or car crashes. That's all we can do. And that was it. That was really funny. And so when you think about what's going on right now, dancing and Fast and Furious, I mean, the movie's Pitch Perfect. It's still the same. And so when you think about what's going on right now, I guess there's some variation along the way. But that was pretty funny. That was fun at 20, right out of film school.
Right.
That was a really interesting thing to hear. It's like I was like I probably scoffed at it at the time. But there's so many moments like that where the basics of the audience and the way they see things come clear to you. That doesn't mean you don't reach for the other things. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you'll get there. But most of the time, it's pretty. There's some basic stuff going on. And dancing and crashing cars. That's a lot of the basics.
Most of the time, it's pretty. There's some basic stuff going on, and dancing and crashing cars. That's a lot of the basics.
I had a question in terms of how much
I'd say
was Farley improving
I'm not saying he
versus
didn't
how
improv,
much was
but I'm saying
written
in
in the
terms of what
original
was in the
script.
movie, ultimately
I'd say
90-10 in the script to in
I'm not saying he didn't
improv. But some of the funniest
in
moments
terms
were
of what
improv.
was in the movie. Ultimately, 90-10 in the script to in the improv. But some of the funniest moments were improv.
That's awesome to hear. I mean, again, he was one of the, I mean, especially because it's like we're taught different things when it comes to writing different genres of scripts. When you're writing, they teach us kind of when you're writing a comedy script to kind of leave more kind of ends open, like write kind of what's necessary for the joke, but to leave some leeway for the actor to act, and especially if they're like a comedic actor, or comedian to begin with,
Well, I mean,
to
maybe as a director,
have like kind of I guess the
I could
blueprint
understand that,
for
but I
what's
don't understand
there,
it as a
but to
writer.
also let them
I
kind
mean,
of
as a
do
writer, my
anything they
responsibility
decide.
is to cover every second of the movie.
As a director,
And to make sure that doesn't mean there isn't room. They'll find room, believe me.
I mean, as a writer, my
That doesn't, but it's
cover
like,
every
yes, I suppose if they find room
and to make sure that
and it throws the balance of the
Right.
timing of the movie off,
it's like, yes,
that would be a problem. And I think you do see that in some movies where, there's something doesn't move as quick as it was meant to. It's overemphasized or it's de-emphasized because I mean, you could write from the. It's funny because my partner and I had a totally different view of this, by the way. So it's probably what that friction was part of what was in our work at times, which is that he looked at every scene individually, and I looked at the whole. I'm not saying he didn't look at the whole or I didn't look at the scenes, but what I mean is that if a scene went on and it was too long for me, I would judge that length based upon my thinking process on how fast that scene needs to move in the big picture of the movie. And he didn't think that mattered. He thinks as long as the scene worked as its own thing, then it doesn't matter because it's still engaging and you find a transition and you move on. And but that bugged me a lot. And so, I know a lot of improv movies have done improv, and if you have the time to do it that way, or the kind of filmmaker to do it that way, then more power to you. I mean, that's great if you can get some great jokes that way. But and I know a lot of actors feel that, but I would never deliver a script that I thought had any air. I really wouldn't. To me, my job is to control the audience's perception as much as I can, and if that doesn't, if they can add on to that, that's great. But and also, this is going to bring up a kind of interesting point about style writing. Okay, so I've said that this script was rewritten a bunch of times, and all those scripts never were used. And I think it was. This is going to sound really weird, and it does relate to improvisation. This way we wrote this script stylistically was there's a certain amount of physical humor, which, by the way, it's very hard to improv physical humor because physical humor might require equipment. So it's not easy for people to suddenly stop in the middle of the day of working and say, oh, we've got this new gag we want to do where he goes flying off this direction or he bangs into this instead of that. And the reason is because those things are rigged
and
to
say,
break,
we've got this new gag we want to do,
right?
where he goes
So
flying
it's
off
not a
this
lot
cliff,
you can do
or he
without
runs into this,
calling the art
or
director in,
and
stopping everything, and
because
stopping the
those
schedule.
things are rigged to break,
You know, so you can improvise
right?
Right.
dialogue
So it's not a lot
as
you
much
can
as you
do
want, but it's
without
harder to
calling the
improvise
art
the
director
physical
in,
humor.
stopping everything, and stopping the
Anyway,
schedule.
that's an offshoot point. The point I'm getting
You know,
at
so
is
you can
we
improvise
wrote this.
dialogue
I had this
as much as
experience
you want,
reading
but it's
scripts
harder to
where if it was a
improvise.
physical comedy and
Anyway,
it was
that's
like
an
very
offshoot point.
physical,
The point I'm getting at
and people
is
would certainly
we
look at
wrote
Beverly Hills
this.
Ninja that way,
We
but
had this
it wasn't
experience writing
exactly
this
written
script
that way.
where if it was a physical comedy
And
and it was like
we
very
wrote
physical,
it so that
and
there
people would
was
certainly look at
dialogue,
Beverly Hills Ninja
and
that
the
way,
dialogue would normally
but
set
it
up
wasn't exactly
the
written.
physical comedy. So,
And
because when I read those other
we
scripts
wrote
throughout
it
my career
so
prior,
that there was
you'd have
dialogue,
physical gag, physical
and the
gag, physical
dialogue would
gag,
normally
and then you'd
set
get
up
bored
the
because
physical
the
comedy.
story, the emotional
So when
content
I read
was
those
was
scripts
losing its
throughout my
connection,
career prior, you'd have
and
physical gag,
you
physical gag, physical gag, and then
you
you'd
know,
get
you
bored
pretty
because the
much, even in the
story,
most physical,
the
crazy
emotional
comedy,
content
even though you might
was
read reviews that will
losing its
differ from
connection.
this, you know, you have to keep
And
the audience still on the storyline to some extent.
you
And,
much,
you know,
even in the
maybe
most
not in
physical
Hot Shots or
comedy,
in,
even
you
though you
know,
might read
a
reviews that
spoof
will
movie, but a
differ from
spoof, by
this,
the way, you know, people
you have to keep
lump
the
them
audience
together.
still
Beverly Hills
on the
Ninja is not a
storyline to
spoof
some
movie
extent.
like,
And, you know, maybe not in Hot Shots,
Airplane
you know,
or, you know,
spoof movie, but it's
whatever the
together.
Wayans
You know,
brothers are
people
doing recently,
lump them
Scream,
together. Beverly Hills
Take Off.
Ninja is
It's
not
not
a
that.
spoof movie like
Those movies are sort of designed for you to just shoot off in any direction
Airplane or,
to any joke
Scary
and come
movie,
back.
yeah.
recently.
Right,
And
It's not
Ninja's
that.
not like that.
Those
It's a
movies
story,
are sort of designed for you to
and
shoot off in any
and it
direction
sticks to the
to
story,
any joke
scene by scene by
and
scene.
come back.
And so, okay, so we wrote this thing where we had this kind of rule in our head that we would not couple two physical gags together unless they were like really made sense to be together. So there was like a setup. He says something about himself. He does the opposite by crashing into something, or some version of whatever. He's saying, "Hold on, I'm doing the dog thing."
So there was like setup. He says something about himself. He does the opposite by crashing into something. Some
So that was our method.
He's saying, "Hold on, I'm doing the dog thing."
Every one of those rewrites that other people didn't do that. You know, you know, whether or not the writers that were chosen were real, like, got real into physical comedy, I don't know. But thinking about it, not as much. But they would write these very dense sections that were how the physical gag was going to work, and then how this led to this, almost like you know, the Rube Goldberg thing. One thing leads to another, leads to another. Somehow we are reading this. This may be only a reading issue, not even a watching issue. But reading is the first test of the script, because you have to get past the people just reading it. So you have to make it palatable. And so if you're writing a lot of physical gags on top of each other, and they get bored with that because they can't quite latch back on to some character point or emotional point, or it's just too much description, you lost them. So all those scripts were kind of like that. And we went, when we got the script back and we did the work at the end, and, you know, basically rewrote the script before it got made, we just kept to our style. And I'm pretty sure that was what was working in the script that people liked, that it wasn't cluttered with physical gags. It was a little bit more cluttered as a movie, when things got cut out and done a certain way, and maybe I wasn't able to make this point so well to the director, you know, but maybe it's a little more cluttered that way. But this was our rule, and it worked for us in the long run, because that was the script that people suddenly went, now it's rewritten. We get it now. All those other things, they didn't work. That's why it didn't go forward. So, That's kind of my thing on improvisation, because
Suddenly went,
yeah, maybe you could improv some of that dialogue in between,
they didn't work. That's why
but they never did that. You know, it's like if you write two gags on top of each other, I don't know if they're going to stop and improv in between. You still have to. They're not going to create that space.
But they never did that. You know, it's like if you write two gags on top of each other, I don't know if they're going to stop and improv in between.
Right.
They're not going to create that space.
Right. I guess more of what I was saying was, I guess, like the scene in Taxi Driver, for instance, and where Travis is looking into the mirror and he says, you know, the famous De Niro line, "You talking to me like you must be because I'm the only one here."
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Like in the script that said Travis looks at mirror, you know, and then all that was improv.
Well, that could have happened. I mean, I don't know whether they thought that would happen, so they purposely did that.
In terms of what you're saying,
you know, I mean, we put that scene, by the way, if you, I don't know if you recall this, that scene is in Beverly Hills Ninja.
Right.
Whether they thought that would happen, so they purposely did that.
So we were spoofing there. So there, I stand corrected.
By the way, if you recall this,
we weren't shotgunning it scene by scene, but we did spoof a couple things.
So we were spoofing there. So there, I stand corrected.
Oh, you know what? There's a great improv moment.
We weren't shotgunning it scene by scene.
I believe this was an improv moment.
Well, that's all part of comedy.
God, it's so long ago. But there is a great improv moment in Beverly Hills Ninja, I think. So I don't know how well you remember this movie, but he is in the dojo early in the movie. And
so I don't know how
the female character comes in, and
in the dojo,
he's trying to show off for her, and he is swinging around those shurikens. No, not shurikens. The what are these called? The I don't remember. No, at this point he's actually swinging around more like a staff. Okay, and he hits this stack of artifacts, and it's on like a shelf system, and it's supposed to immediately trigger to go to crash. Well, actually, it didn't crash right away, so there was some improv on just that not happening correctly. But then the urn falls, and the ashes all mixed together from the old Ninja Masters. And that was mostly an improv thing where he started picking up the ashes and naming the different masters that he thought each ashes were, and then he was putting them back haphazardly in an urn, and then he kind of realized this was ridiculous, and it didn't work. So he said he put two together, and he said they worked as a team. I don't know if you remember that line, but that was I'm pretty sure that was an improv line.
Realized this was ridiculous, and it didn't work. So he said we put two together, and he said they worked as a team. I don't know if you remember that line.
Well, you probably remember better than I do.
I definitely remember that. I actually watched the movie last night, so I'd have a spitting image in my head.
Remember better than
I do. That scene is classic. And the fact that you said that was basically improv, I'm like, that makes sense.
Something went wrong.
It's Farley being Farley. Farley at his
lemonade out of it.
Just phenomenal.
I mean, he just was
comedian.
Something.
What's that?
Right.
He's making
exactly. And and that was his view.
Right.
That was his.
Life gives you lemons, make lemonade.
That was why he was lovable, because he had this view of his future and what he was going to be able to do with it, and that, by the way, is the movie was patterned after the Pink Panther, because if you look at Clouseau's character, I always say that Clouseau was also like a train wreck coming into almost every scene that he was in. And
Because if you look at Clouseau's character,
there was a slight difference in that one of the great things about Clouseau is if Clouseau walked into a wall,
Right.
he would blame the wall.
Right.
You know, it's like he was arrogant. He had this little funny, arrogant element that was like this French thing that he did, you know? And Farley, he didn't quite, there's a little bit of that. We certainly went for it at times, but he was such a sweet character as opposed to Clouseau, you would never call sweet. That he, you know, if he was at all saying anything arrogant, you probably didn't even realize it.
Such a sweet character, as opposed to Clouseau, you would never call sweet.
Right.
But you know, it did bother me a lot when people criticized him in the movie for, in a sense, like they would psychoanalyze him and his selling him being overweight, and they would put the blame on him in some way. You know, like somehow it shows up his pathos. And I just really, you know, I don't mind being criticized for whatever, but I just really felt bad about that. And I do think it was an essential part of confusion for him.
I just really, you know, I don't mind being criticized for whatever, but I just really felt bad about that. And I do think it was an essential part of confusion for him.
I definitely agree with that, and it's probably one of the many battles that he faced that unfortunately led to his end. Um, but you know, it would have been great to see him, you know, strive in
And
what
also Elf.
the
I think he was
transition that he was
supposed to do
trying
Elf as well.
do
Now,
with
of course, I mean, I like Will
which
Ferrell and
went
Elf. I
into
thought he was
Almost
wonderful,
Heroes,
but it was supposed to
you know,
be
would have
Chris,
gone
and I
into
think Chris
Shrek,
would have been
and would have
amazing at it.
gone into
And also Elf. I think he
Elf.
was
Yeah.
supposed to do Elf as well. Now, of course, I mean, I like Will Ferrell and Elf. I thought he was wonderful.
Right. Right.
I mean, I'm a little confused because there was the title of the movie. There was he was attached to a project, and I think it was called Gelfin.
Now that you mentioned that, I'm like,
but I think
that
it was
would
Elf.
have been again.
I think it was the same
movie.
It just had a different title
I'm a
at the time.
confused because there was the title of the movie.
So that's a bunch of crap I just said. Okay, so I don't
know.
know. I really don't know what I've always assumed that, and I could have assumed it wrong.
Just had a different title at the time.
That's interesting.
Similar concept.
Put it that. Okay, so I don't know. I really don't know what I've always assumed that, and I could have assumed it wrong.
Well,
similar concept.
Right. Well, on that note, we're at about an hour and 20 minutes here.
Okay.
I have one last question for you, which is kind of continuing question I asked my interviewees on the Fishbowl, and it's actually like a part 1, part 2 question. The first is, do you have any upcoming projects?
I do have some things coming up.
Can discuss. And
I mean, one is
final question is
what are has the funding in place. It's not a script that I originally wrote. I did rewrite it. And I'm a producer on it, and it's called 50. It's a heist movie. I don't know if that'll be the title in the long run, but it has a little bit of comedy in it, but it's mostly a heist movie. And I kind of switched. I've been kind of confused about comedy versus thrillers and things like that over the last bunch of years, because comedy has been so hard to get going, because studios are making bigger movies, and the way that you finance smaller movies requires pre-sales from Europe and around the world. And comedies don't tend to travel as well, so it's harder to get those pre-sales. I did manage to put it together for a sequel of Beverly Hills Ninja with one of the guys from High School Musical playing the lead, so it was kind of the dancing ninja movie. And that's a story in its own right that we could do a very long interview about. And I wished it came out a little bit better. And a lot of it, some of it's my fault because I was also the director on some of it. And
that's a story
the
that we could do a very long interview about.
So I've been focused not so much on comedy, so that's why I'm doing this movie 50, and a couple of other projects. One of which is a bigger movie and has a lot of jokiness in it, but it's also kind of a big adventure action movie. And but I can't really talk about that. And but I will when the time comes. And lately I've been kind of political. So I've been doing comedy in the political realm, just shorts and things like that. And the writing that I've been focusing on has all been in the thriller world. But some of that's because I just keep writing the same script over and over again. Excuse me. I had to go let the dog in again.
Just shorts and things like that.
I don't know. A typical script for me it can go through 30 rewrites. And I may not even show it to anybody for the first 10. Or if I show it to somebody, I'm only showing it to readers. Like, I tend to work with, I'll finish a draft, I'll get 5 readers to read it and see if there's a consensus amongst the readers. Not people I know at all. And I would even, my name on it doesn't even matter. It's like, they wouldn't even necessarily know. Unless they're looking people up when they're reading every script, which I doubt. But sometimes I haven't even put my name on it. But it's, I basically have been working in a different genre. But now the comedy is having like a comeback right now. Kind of more in the social, in the smaller budget range and stand up and stuff, but a little bit in the movie world too. And I never really worked in the comedy sitcom world except on a single camera Disney comedy because I never really related to the sitcom format. The one with where you rehearse all week and then you shoot on Friday or Thursday or whatever, and it's all done in one set. I was, trained as a film person, or I trained myself as a film person, and so that's kind of the way I operate on a single camera perspective, which budget-wise tends to run a little higher, so it kind of went out of style for a while. It's always a little tougher to do, and I just don't really focus so much on TV, but I did write and produce quite a few episodes for that Disney show, The Jersey. And the second question was my favorite movies. Wow. Comedy-wise, Ghostbusters is probably like one of my favorite movies. I really love that series, and especially the first one. The first one was just amazing. But I like them all. And The Godfather. I have very classic taste, It's like Field of Dreams is one of my favorite movies. I haven't watched it recently, so I don't know. Exactly. Recently, because I see so many movies that if you asked me what I saw a month ago, I'd forget. It's not. It's hard to, really find ones that really jump out. And but of course there have been, and I'm not going to say they're all classic. I mean, there's to be like more film schoolish. There's an action movie called Point Blank that was done by. It was a French movie, really amazingly good, relentless action movie. And I also loved, even though it's not really the script, I wouldn't say holds up completely, but I love it. Kung Fu Hustle.
Really amazingly good, relentless action movie. And I also love, even though it's not really the script, I wouldn't say holds up completely, but I love it.
It did look amazing.
Kung Fu Hustle.
And it
that
And
is a great movie.
interestingly, just a
It's
little
one of
offshoot
my
of that is that
that was
on
like it
Dancing
came out when I was
Ninja, I
in
got
high
to
school,
work with
and
the visual
I
effects guy
remember
from that
seeing the
movie.
trailer for it. I'm like, this looks
So
amazing,
he and I storyboarded the whole movie
and
together. And then we found out how much money we had and ripped up the storyboards.
Is that on Dancing Ninja, I got to
No,
work
we didn't
with
rip them up. In
the
fact, I
visual
have
effects
them.
guy from that
And
movie.
I actually should
awesome.
put them together as a book
So he and I
because
storyboarded
they're
the whole
they're
movie.
really well done
And then we
storyboards.
found out how much
And
money we had.
it's like having a comic book. And so it would be really
No, we
cool
didn't rip them up.
to actually assemble it and then actually print
Put
it
them together as a book.
or get it inked or something because it's not in color. But it's really cool
And it's like having a comic book.
because we had never on any other movie I had worked on. There were always storyboards, but it wasn't like we had Korean funded. They in Korea the way they work is they create a storyboard book,
It's not in color, but it's really.
and so
cool.
we had it. And
Because
the
we had
movie's
never,
nothing like
on
that,
any other movie
except
I
in the
worked
beginning.
on, there were always storyboards, but it wasn't. Like,
But
we had
yeah,
Korean
it's
funded.
you can go watch it, The Dancing Ninja.
They
Tell me what
created
you think,
book,
but not recorded.
and the movie's nothing like that.
No, it can be recorded. I can take whatever I get.
But yeah.
So in terms of future, you know, let's see.
Awesome.
I tried to get off the
will.
ground so far this year, but it was really before the election got as crazy as it did. Something called GOP the Musical. And it really wasn't based at first on what was going on now. It was just my political point of view and some of the funny things that I saw about it. And it was going to be like designed like a musical, but it was going to be a music videos. So it'd be like 10 music videos and 10 then an act break, and not act break in the film sense, but in a curtain Broadway play type sense. And then there would be another 8 or 10 songs for the ending. But then when the election became basically, it overpowered that story. It was like more like it did cover some of these issues, but it was never as crazy as this has turned out to be. And it actually, you know what? The end of the first act was the GOP convention, and it turned into a total brawl. Like a fist, like the floor of the convention was like a fist fight. Actually, it was more like, what's that song? I always get it wrong. Something for what? What is that song? I don't know how well you're. I'd have to look it up right now on my notes, but it was this crazy, very like heavy rock song in which this guy is like overcome by like a power, and he's like basically sexually like throwing his hips around, and people are just their clothes are blowing off, and all this kind of crazy stuff happens, and they can hate him at first, and it's a fight, but then his like unbelievable like mystical energy comes out and he wins them over. And that was what the song that we were going to re-spoof for the ending for the sorry about my phone going off. I don't know. I tried to turn this ringer off of this phone 100 times, and it's just a ringer that won't die. It comes back to haunt me constantly. And I even reduce it, and then this woman talks constantly, and no matter what I do, she will not shut up. So anyway, it was this crazy, wild scene at the end of the second act. So I can get lost in politics for a while. And I did create like the setup for a sitcom based on that game that I worked on for the NSA, and called Bad Intelligence. And which is interesting because there's a movie like that that came out this weekend. A CIA with the word intelligence in it. And I should know this because it's a good friend's like.
Which is interesting because there's a movie like that came out this weekend.
Yes.
A CIA.
Yeah. And so, but this was a sitcom, and it was really based on,
was
the
that
NSA turning to this game company to create this game to try to solve the problems of the military command structure.
Yeah. And so,
See, that just makes me laugh right away. Except I don't know if that makes me laugh in a way that would translate to a broad audience.
To create this game to try to solve the problems of the military command structure. See, that just makes me laugh right away. Except I don't know if that makes me laugh in a way that would translate to a broad audience.
Well, I have my own movie idea based on the recent politics, which is called Arena, which is about basically a distant world where all
You know what? See,
politicians
this
are
is how I
transported
would do
from
it
Earth
too. But I
into
would
an
still keep
arena
the
owned by
you.
alien
If you really do
beings
this,
to have an
I'm just
all-out
going to pitch you an
bash
idea.
to the last
Um,
remaining politician.
so that's a great idea, and you do that idea. But what happens when somebody wins or loses? It translates into what's going on in the
All right.
campaign here in a kind of way that we would understand. So, in other words, if somebody's winning, then the media shifts to there's a bunch of flubs on the other person's side. It translates into like what's going on now on the Trump thing. You could have like where he'll falter, and all of a sudden the media will shift, and it'll look like he's winning, and then you cut back to the fight, and then he starts to win again. So then the what's going on in the U.S. changes. So basically, it's one of those like Men in Black type ideas where there's two realities going on at the same time, and there's really a big brawl that's really the final say, but it's being translated into this crazy, like typical political fight that we understand here. Where there's two realities going on at the same time, and I never saw Rollerball, but that's what happens there. There's two worlds. Final say, but it's being translated into this crazy, typical political fight that we understand here.
Right, it's kind of like Rollerball.
Yeah.
Now, I never saw Rollerball, but that's what happens there. There's two worlds.
Well, it's like in the sense it's like like the game is rolled by kind of like a corrupt political authority.
Yeah.
And it shifts. It's like the people focus their full attention and money on betting on who will win the rollerball game, and it shifts on who is the champion at the time, and the team and like what they're doing, and leading up to basically the protagonist of the film overcomes the corrupt government, and in a sense changes the way things work, to become whatever it becomes. Hopefully, steer away from corruption and back to just cause and everything. But kind of like where I'm going with inspiration is definitely from the more recent Rollerball, which wasn't anywhere near as good as the one with James Caan. But kind of taking like what was applied in the remake of Rollerball and putting it into this crazy whacked out.
I think it's great. When was the last Rollerball?
Politicians and having them duke it out, to the last one, fight to the death.
Because it might be the right time to do this now. I can pick this other moment just popped into my head. I mean, basically, like what's happening now in our discussion is like the thing that I like to do the most, which is in the movie world, which is just riff on ideas. And so I just had this thing where somebody says, they transport them over, and somebody, there's a line like, well, she's Hillary's the first woman. How is that fair? And then she just like clocks Trump, because you think she's like at a disadvantage, and then you see this viciousness come, like intense, crazy ability to come out of her, where she completely beats the shit out of him for a moment.
How is that fair?
Yes, I like it. Because we all reinvent everything in our own image. So that's the one thing unfortunately about when you get rewritten on a movie is that it just completely goes off in another direction. I don't know if, because I don't have a credit on this, people don't know this so much, is that I wrote the first 4 drafts of Ocean's 11. And I don't know if you knew that, but it went through 44 other drafts since then. But we were the ones that originally sold that project.
First 4 drafts of Ocean's 11.
So it was a sad thing to lose complete control over that, and then to have and of course, because it's based on another movie, we don't like if you create something fresh and original, and then you get rewritten 44 times. There's a good chance you're still going to get story credit or you're going to get screenplay credit. It's the way credits work. If your audience ever cares about that, that's a whole nother discussion. But in our case, because there's pre-existing material, we don't get that status. The first writers don't get that status because that status goes to the original movie. It's called separated rights, actually, but in the technical term. So our names, as soon as it was rewritten, our names were gone from it. Except on Studio System, on that one industry kind of database, they still retain our names on that project.
So our names, as soon as it was rewritten,
but not on IMDb Pro, because IMDb Pro works from a different perspective, where you have to they match the credits. They don't know what's really going on. So they don't list rewriters or originators or whatever. All they can go by is what's on the final film. And that's probably the way it should be, because that's the way it ultimately ends up. So we got paid. So
right.
They don't list rewriters
and then maybe that should be the last line of our interview. We got paid.
Right.
And that's probably the way it should be, because that's the way it ultimately ends up. So we got paid. So
my pleasure.
That's what really counts.
And maybe that should be the last line.
Right.
Of our interview. We got paid.
Awesome. Well, Mitch, it's been great having you on the show.
Absolutely.
Thank you for swimming in the bowl with me.
And remember, this is the next cynical thing I'm going to say.
I don't know.
Your script is ready.
I would love
this
to
is
send
the
you
worst
some of my
thing I have
stuff,
to say
at a later point, just to
your script is ready when it elicits
Absolutely.
greed
Awesome.
in another person.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to.
And remember, this is the next cynical thing.
Good night.
Right.
Your script is
Thanks a lot.
This is the worst thing I have to say.